to my country. Welcome to my home.
And good morning, everybody. Peggy Berryhill here at KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. And my co-pilot, my wing woman, Leanne Lindsay, is in the background. And today we have a fabulous show. It's been decades in the making. My dear friend Ginny Berson is here, and she is going to talk about this book. This book, if you haven't read it, you may want to read it, all about Olivia records. Some of you may be very familiar with that, some of you not. And notice, Jenny, I have a few tabs here. So
I see.
Okay, yeah, I've got your mic down. But first, a couple of quick announcements locally. This Friday, I believe it's Friday, Redwood Coast Medical Services is having a special board meeting, their annual audit meeting, and you can join them. Go online, go to RCMS, and find out how you can click on to the RCMS board meeting. Redwood Coast Medical Services, Jenny, is our little clinic here. It's a frontier clinic. It's technically known as that. And they have done this amazing job of giving us half of our population over 65 are vaccines. Pretty amazing to be out here in our rural community. I don't know about how many of you are used to living in Santa Rosa, but Santa Rosa is having a hard time getting people their vaccines. And I don't know how it's doing in Oakland, but okay, so that's the RCMS board meeting. Then we're going to move into April right away, opening. Is this the first one? Yeah, opening Saturday, this April 3rd from 11 to 7. There's going to be a special art show. Our dear friend Jane Head, who's a tremendous artist, does gigantic canvases. Her art is so wonderful. And she's put together an art show she's calling Heart and Soul, and she's trying to help raise money for RCMS and Gualala Arts, because as we all know, none of us have been able to hold our fundraising events. And we're all just hanging on by a thread. So this is going to be a great event. I'll show you a little picture of it. That's the fun of being on YouTube. We can show you some photos, and go to gualalaarts.org and learn more about that. And then the other thing that's very important in our area is the Sonoma County Radio Amateurs Club is offering a 12-week online technician class so you can get your amateur radio license. It's very important, we've found, particularly for the radio station when we have had fires, whatever kind of power outages, to get information. We stay in touch with the Amateur Radio Club. And in fact, we have an agreement with them. If that happens again, they're going to come down here and just be right here in the studio with us so we can stay in touch with the rural areas when the power is out, and let's hope that we don't have enough fires. So if you want to be one of those people, you can go to, I believe, where is their website? Where's your website? Well, look up Amateur Radio Club, Sonoma County Amateur Radio Club. And you can find out, here it is. The website may be found here, parcradio.org, parkradio.org, and sign up. All right. Well, now I got to do this. I got to go sit back here and go, hello, Jenny. And hello, Oakland. We do that for our friends in Budapest and Czechoslovakia when they listen. So they might be listening. I don't know.
Okay. Well, can I do it too? Hello, Peggy.
Of course you can.
Hello, Wallala.
There you go. Well, in full disclosure, Ginny and I have known and loved each other for, a long time. Since the 80s, at least.
40 years, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And that's, isn't it weird when you look at people who are old and they're your friends? You go, wow, what happened here?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, our people, or look at your own picture. Ginny and I met many, many years ago, and I have to tell you, we've worked together on many projects, had a lot of fun, good fun. But the first project that we met on there was an attempt in, God, was it 80 or something? I don't know, to start an all woman's radio station.
Correct.
And so that's the first time I met Jenny. She came in her boots and her jeans and her little tweedy jacket, looking like she was all business. And Diane Kaplan, who is a very famous public radio person and runs, well, the Rasmussen Fund now in Anchorage, Alaska, but she's been involved in radio for many years. She was there. I can't remember who else was there, Jenny, a couple of other people, but
I have a memory that Margaret Sloan Hunter was there. Maybe I made that up. And Helen Muskevich.
oh yeah,
And
Bob Miscavige, former news director at KPFA many moons ago.
I don't remember anybody else.
Yeah, and I don't, it was Pat with me? Was it just
Yes, Pat.
Yeah. Okay. So this, and I don't even know how that whole thing came together, but it didn't last very long. I do remember that Diane Kaplan and her friend Jane, who had a show, late night show at KPFA, wanted the call letters to be KMOM. Do you remember that? We kind of looked, we don't think so. The interesting thing about that, and I'm going to lead you into what part of what we're going to talk about today, as I showed you earlier, this wonderful book that Jenny just wrote, Olivia on the Record. Jenny Berson is one of the founders of the very famous Olivia Record Company. The New York Times did an article. Actually, the New York Times did several articles about you when I was doing some research. In the 80s, they did a lot, not about you personally, but about Olivia music, which was really nice to see. You were on the same page as another famous jazz artist at the same time, I remember. But anyway, this is a wonderful book. Jenny, you're such a wonderful writer. I enjoyed reading this so much. And there's so much herstory in here. And we're going to talk about that along with Olivia. And just one other thing, I just want to say that Jenny and I have worked together after that meeting that didn't go anywhere for women's radio. I don't know, sometime later, I think I was then program director at KPFA, and we were starting a women's department. And I thought, that Ginny Berson person should be in charge of that. And much to the consternation of the other women who were there, we hired Jenny, and she did an amazing job. But more than that, she has gone on to become one of the most beloved people in community radio. She worked with the National Federation of Community Broadcasters for many years, as we both did. And, whatever I taught Jenny, she went way beyond in her skills and in her working with people all over community radio, all over the United States. And I'm not just saying that when I say she is one of the most beloved people. She absolutely is, and has done wonderful work for community stations like ours and boards and all other kinds of stuff. But when we read this book, we learn about Jenny's other life, who she was before radio. Because we all were something before radio, even though we've all been in radio now. I've been in here almost 5 decades, Jenny. And I have to say, this book did shed some light on who I was before. I like me much better now.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So
Not about you. I know what you mean about me.
Well, and there's some stuff in there we want to talk about. We certainly want to talk about Olivia's music. And I understand we're about the 4th interview you've done so far. I'm not surprised. As I said, the book is so well written, so much fun to read. And it brings out some herstory that is so little known. Not just about Olivia. We're going to talk about Olivia too, and play some music. And for those of you who don't know, that Olivia was primarily, when I say women's music, lesbian music or lesbian music makers. It's just for lesbians. But Chris Williamson, Meg Christian, Teresa Trull, Gwen Avery, Linda Tillery. Oh gosh, the list goes.
Mary Watkins.
Mary Watkins, B.B. Caroch, and in that whole era in the 80s when all over the United States, women's music festivals, and Ginny was a pioneer and part of all of that. And it's really fun to read about. But I want to talk about, because you start the book in Washington, D.C., when you're young, angry, radical, part of a group that was known as the Furies. Would you tell us about that era?
Well, first of all, can I just say thank you, Peggy, for that very effusive introduction and your very kind words, and how totally thrilled I am to be talking with you this morning on KGUA and just connecting with you in this way. So the Furies, this is Washington, D.C. in the very early 70s. And it was a time of great ferment in the country. And a lot of it was centered in Washington, D.C., because that's where, of course, the government of the United States resides. The war in Vietnam was raging. And there were massive protests all the time in D.C. People were traveling around the country easily. The cost of living was so much lower than it is now. There was a huge amount of radical activity, and a lot of liberation movements were happening in Washington and elsewhere. The Black Panther Party was very active. The American Indian movement was very active. La Raza was very active. And the women's liberation movement was very active. And of course, Stonewall, which is kind of considered the beginning of the gay liberation movement, had happened, the Stonewall Rebellion, in 1969. And in Washington, D.C., there came to be a group, there was a very active women's liberation movement, which was working on a lot of different issues, a lot of issues around reproductive rights for women and women's health care. And also a different kind of movement. There were groups called Women Against Imperialism, Women Against Racism, Women Against pretty much everything. And women started coming out. Women started coming out as lesbians, and found that there was not really space for us in the gay movement, which was pretty male dominated and not particularly political at that point. And a group of us in Washington, D.C., who had come from a variety of places. From some people have been working on the Chicago 7 trial, which was that's another story. But that was Bobby Seale and Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin and Tom Hayden, Dave Dillinger, the Chicago protests around the Democratic Convention in 1968. Others had come from women's liberation. I had been active in the farm workers boycott movement in Connecticut. Anyway, we all came together, and a number of the women, I had come out by then, and a number of the straight women were starting to come out, and we put together this group and basically decided that what was needed was we began to develop really a set of politics that defined what we called lesbian feminism. And that basically what we were saying was that that lesbianism by itself is not enough, and that feminism by itself is not enough. And that put them together and they create this very strong political thought, political theory about how to approach patriarchy and how to approach capitalism and how to approach all the systems of oppression. And so we met for about a year and put out a monthly newspaper called The Furies, which was neither monthly nor did it have any news, but it had a lot of our thoughts in it about patriarchy and about heterosexism and about class. And it had poetry and drawings and like that. It was very influential, which I don't know that we knew at the time. And I've found out since just how many women read it and were influenced by it. And in fact, there's a documentary coming out soon called Once a Fury that's being made by a woman named Jacqueline Rhodes, who's a young woman, younger than us, and was very influenced by the Furies as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. And we only lasted a year, but it's so interesting to me how much we did in those days when everything moved so much more slowly because we didn't have instant communications, but we got so much more done. And it's just kind of interesting. So the Furies lasted about a year, and then we split up and all went our different ways. Some of us went in the same way. Some of the members of the Furies ended up being part of the original group that started Olivia Records.
Yeah, it was such an interesting history, and a year seems so brief for all the inroads that you made. The manifesto, which was quite radical, and the ideals that you had. Yet out of that will lead to many things, but including Olivia. Including, the women's music festivals, all kinds of things, but as a sense of separation and isolation, not isolation, but wanting to be women doing their own thing in the way that women felt comfortable. And I mean, like you said, it was that age of becoming, in the meantime, out here, we were becoming in a completely different way, but yeah, I was really fascinated by it, and also at the same time, I could see how limiting it could be to other women, particularly women of color, for example. But that's another story. I mean, but that's all part of the becoming. So let's the writing. Yes, you're right. How things move slowly. And you just reminded me how many organizations were doing newspapers or periodicals and mailing them out around the country. Amazing. Are there copies of your papers still somewhere in an archive?
There are several. I mean, I think they're all available online if you Google the Furies, but also, I had a complete set. I just sent all of my papers off to the Smith College Women's History Archive. And I think other people have complete sets too. Jacqueline Rhodes, who made the Furies documentary, has a set, but I think they're all available. If you look online, you can find them. And they're very, you're right, they were very, we were very angry. But we were also, Peggy, the thing about this time was that, to me, what happened was when you stop, to the degree that anyone is able to, when you stop accepting what people tell you is wrong with you, when you stop believing that and throw that off to the extent that you can, it is so liberating. It is so, and there is so much energy that is created and released. And I think that's why all of these liberation movements happening at this time, there was such a flurry of just creativity everywhere, of political creativity and artistic creativity, and it was an extraordinary time, and maybe we're entering another time like that.
Well, wouldn't that be wonderful? It's certainly needed. I'll just say one more thing about that. I mean, you're talking about the anger, which, certainly I could identify on the level that I was operating in. And I remember, boy, it's just jumping fast forward, but thinking at that time that if I ever stopped being angry, I would be of no use to my people,
Uh-huh.
you know. And of course, I stopped being angry and I was much more useful. Stopped a lot of things. So let's talk a little bit more about, and I love this photo, this cover. I can't help but do a little name dropping. One of the Furies also was another famous artist, writer, Rita Mae Brown,
Yes.
who many people are familiar with. And you also, your early days, I was so impressed with your memory of what shaped your politics. I mean, before you got into the Furies, I don't think I could go back with my memory and think about those younger days. And really, really good to hear to read that. So let's talk about after leaving the Furies, or however it happened, an organic breakup as people went their different ways, how someone came to you and you got involved with what became women's music.
So so what happened is, as part of the Furies, so there was a musician who was named Meg Christian, who was performing professionally in DC in all the nightclubs. She kept getting fired because she was allegedly bringing in the wrong clientele, which meant lesbians. Although we behaved and dressed nicely, and didn't do lesbian things in the clubs except sit with each other without men, which was apparently pretty threatening. So there was this woman, we knew her, we went to her shows, and the Furies decided that we needed to have more allies in the community, that we needed people who would defend us, because we were sure we were going to be attacked by the FBI or the police pretty soon. And so I was given the assignment to try to organize Meg and to bring her over and we didn't think very much. We liked her music, but we didn't think she was very political. So my job was to try to organize her. And so in the bar one night, we were dancing, and I just fell in love with her. So much for my ability to organize her. I would say rather she kind of organized me. We became lovers and partners, and I began managing her, about which I knew nothing, how to manage anybody. But I said to her, why don't you make a tape of your music, and we'll send it to women's centers, and we'll go to women's colleges, and we'll get you on the road, and we'll get you out of these oppressive clubs. And but at the same time that she was singing in clubs, it was very clear that she was having an impact on the straight women who were coming to hear her sing. And I would see this. I would see the women being really moved and touched, and by the fact that Meg's attention was on them. It was not on the men, and that was very unusual. And that told me something about the power of music to get into people's hearts and move them.
I'm going to stop you for just a second. I need to remind people that you are tuned to Peggy's Place on KGUA in Wallala. You may be listening on the TuneIn app, Radio Garden, or our very own Air Pocket. We are also on our YouTube channel live. And I want to repeat the name of the book. The title of the book is Olivia on the Record, A Radical Experiment in Women's Music. I can tell by the pace we're going at, Jenny, we need about 2 or 3 hours to do this. So we're going to have to start picking up the pace.
Okay.
But Meg Christian, and wonderful voice. And the effect, I can't help but say, at that time, it was illegal to be gay.
Yeah.
And when you said you would sit at bars, and I mean, even being able to dance, I can remember clubs in San Francisco where if you danced, the owner of the bar was so paranoid that she would come around with a measuring tape because you couldn't you really couldn't hold each other.
Yeah.
And the cops were liable to, there were special lights in gay bars then to know when the cops were going to come in. It was not easy. It was very dangerous. And plus you could be beaten up by anybody on the outside, but you had to worry about the cops. And all of those things were so different than they are today. So yes, it was just being who you were.
Yeah. So I'm going to just fast forward. Basically, what happened is we met Chris Williamson, who was living in California, and we thought was an extremely odd person because she was from California and we were so East Coast and she was so California. But we did a radio interview with her. Actually, we were invited to do a radio interview with her, and we were talking about, we should start a women's tap dance company. We should and then Chris said, you should start a women's record company. And that was a light bulb moment for me. And I knew instantly that was exactly what I wanted to do. And so that's, we gathered women who we had been in communication with and conversation with, and said, let's do this. And we knew nothing about business. We knew nothing about the record industry, but it was 1973, and it didn't matter that we knew nothing. Because we believed that we could do anything and we would figure it out. And so we did. And that's what happened.
And you did an amazing thing. And I want to let the listeners know that all you have to do is Google New York Times Olivia, and there's a wonderful article about there's many articles, but there's one that I think it's the 12 essential songs from the Olivia label that you need to hear. And if we had time, I'm actually going to forgo a lot of the music because I think we want to talk some more. But you'll hear Christian, Chris Williamson, Gwen Avery, B.B. Caroch, a lot of these groups. And it was when you come to the West Coast that made all the difference. I love the history of starting the studio. I love the history of working with vinyl. And when you hear the music and you say, oh, we didn't know anything, the music is wonderful. The audio is great. It just stands the test of time, all of these different voices and all of these artists. So you should be proud of what you did. And it still stands today. And our friend Greg McVicker of Undercurrents, I think, wrote to you and he said he sold a lot of Olivia records when he was at a record store. Are they still available? Or are they in digital? Or are they?
Some of them were digitized, and some of it is available. I have been out of Olivia Records now for 40 years, so I don't think that they're all available, but I know that a lot of the music is still available. Chris Williamson is still putting out music, and all of her music is available. I don't know about anybody else's stuff, to tell you the truth. It wasn't all digitized, and so, but some of it you can get on. I mean, I get some of it on when I do Pandora or whatever,
You say you've been out of Olivia for 40 years. Why write the book?
That's a good question. I wrote the book because a few reasons. One of them is I got tired of the way that the women's movement and the lesbian feminist movement was being portrayed. The movement at that time was being portrayed as basically a white middle class movement that was interested in abortion and birth control and getting men to do housework and kind of an equal rights feminism. And an equal rights feminism was never what we were about. And I felt like there was an important work happened in those times, and that it needed to be known. People needed to know that it happened, and we learned things. I mean, I learned things from my time in Olivia that still have an impact on me. And I didn't want those lessons to be lost. And I also wanted to honor the mostly women who did extraordinary work for for the movement, for liberation, for change, that were kind of being overlooked. I wanted that story to be told. And this is just, my story is just my story. It's a little more than my story, but it's my version of our story. And I understand it's not everybody's version and it's not everybody's story, but it's a piece of our history that we need to understand and we need to know existed. And then plus I had all these people who were leaning on me for years to write the book. So I said, okay, fine, I'll try to write the book. I didn't know how to write a book, but another thing I didn't know how to do. But I was lucky because I knew this wonderful, wonderful lesbian poet and author named Judy Grahn, whose poetry we actually recorded along with Pat Parker's. And I wrote to Judy and said, Judy, I wish you would, and Judy had just published her own memoir by the same publisher, Aunt Loot Books. And I said, I wish you would teach a memoir writing class. And she said, well, you're about the sixth person that's asked me to do that, so I guess I'm going to do it. And so I got to go to her class. And so every month I kind of wrote how to write something. And it was a great experience, actually. It was fun to write.
Well, and we're so glad you did. I'm just going to do a brief quote here on page 14. You say, we were determined to change the music industry, but more than that, much more than that, we were determined to change the world, to overthrow the patriarchy and capitalism, to end racism and imperialism, to create a world where peace, justice, and equity were not just words, but were righteous ideas to be embodied inside ourselves and fought for the world. What we did would prove to be important. How we did it was just important. And when you look at all the lessons, as you say, the mechanical lessons of learning how to put a record together, going from concert like all musicians, car to car, hand to mouth, but what it did for a generation of lesbian women who found a voices, people that they could hang with together, come out together. Not that it was all, everybody's the same. They weren't. One of the things I'm struck by as I read your book, here we are in the Bay Area at the same time, and we're going around similar circles together. Many of the musicians, some of the ones I used to hang out with, like Sweet Chariot, some of the people from BB Caroche, we hung out together. How I met Linda Tillery many years ago. We're not friends, but we, acquaintances. All of those things were going around each other in similar circles, fighting similar things in different ways. And here in the Bay Area, all of that was going on. Now, I talked to our dear friend Nan Rubin. I told her I was going to interview. She said, "Now, Peggy, don't dwell on the Bay Area too much."
But, we chose to come to the Bay Area. So we moved to Los Angeles after DC because it was really hard to be a lesbian record company in DC in the 70s. We moved to LA, excuse me, spent 2 years there, figured out how to actually, how the record industry worked, and then moved up to the Bay Area because it was so much more conducive and supportive of alternative institutions. Then LA was such an industry town. And so that's why we came to the Bay Area, because there was so much happening here that we could connect. And Linda Tillery was actually one of the reasons we moved up here, because we had started working with her and we wanted to keep working with her, and she could not move. She wasn't going to move to LA. So fine, we moved up here. No problem.
No problem. Pat Parker, someone else I knew very well, sadly gone.
Yes.
As are some of the musicians,
Gwen is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And great guitarist and jeweler Peggy Mitchell.
Peggy Mitchell, yeah.
Also
Bobby
gone.
Jackson. A lot of, yeah.
Yeah, lot are gone now. And but what a time it was to have that music, places to go, where things were now different from the early days you and I talked about, when all you could do was sit there
Yeah.
and you didn't dare, barely, you couldn't dare touch each other, hold hands in public, be arrested, all of that. So things change to some degree, and now we're in a whole different era. So the Olivia time was amazing. I mean, I have to say, what you've portrayed in your book. There were a couple of things, though, that, and yes, like I said, I did have some notes. I love this photo of your early studio 4-track. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I was reminded of, I don't know if you saw Ma Rainey's Blues, which is a really tough film. But the making of the records, the dropping the needle on the vinyl made me think about you guys a lot in this book in a much happier way. So thought about a lot about that as reading this, but other things, the working with audiences, you know, that was sort of new. I mean, not to musicians, but to work with the audiences that you helped develop. How did
Well,
that feel?
that was one of the most rewarding parts of what we did was watching, was helping to, I mean, I don't think we did this intentionally, but it was one of the results of bringing the music to all over to cities and rural areas and all over the country, was watching communities see each other for the first time and recognize their existence. Um, um, and that was thrilling. And then we did workshops with the audiences after the concerts. Um, because, to us, the music was the means. I mean, the music was an end in itself, but it was also the means. It was the means to get into women's hearts and to get them to come out, because not everybody who came to these concerts was lesbians when they came in, and not everyone was a lesbian when they left, but a lot more of them were. But the idea was that there are more of us than we know, and we don't know, and we would have these concerts and workshops and talk about, in the workshops we talked about money and class issues, and we talked about what feminism meant, and what does a feminist business look like, and how does it work. And there was a lot of talk about, I don't think we ever used the word equity, because I don't think that was part of our vocabulary, but that's really what we were talking about, was how do you create an equitable institution that works equitably inside, and what it produces and creates results in more equity. And that's really what we were trying to do. That was, but the idea of being responsive to audiences and was a very important part of what we were doing. That we did not want to have a lot of separation. For a long time, Meg would not sign autographs because she felt like, I'm just doing my job. You have a job. You maybe are a carpenter, or you're a waitress or a teacher, and it's what you do is as important as what I do, and why should you have my autograph? Well, that she had to give that up after a while, after people kept demanding her autograph. But that was the idea, was we're trying to create a different kind of society here, in a different kind of world.
So talk just for a few minutes about inside, what the business was like, because you talk about that in detail in the book, and how the roles, Olivia was organized, how the money came in, that part of the economy, that you were trying to create something so different.
Yeah, and it was really, I would have to say now, it was kind of impossible. We're trying to operate in a very socialistic way, with people being paid based on need, which, how do you define need? you know, my need might be, I mean, I remember once having a conversation with a musician who said, well, what if I need a new set of tires for my car? And I thought, but what if I don't have a car? You know, how do we decide what need is more important? But so what we tried to do was, first of all, when there were five of us, the five of us who moved from DC to LA and then up to the Bay Area, we also had a living collective, and we shared all of our money, and we tried to do Olivia full time. And in fact, by the time we got to LA, we were doing Olivia full time, but some of us were able to collect unemployment. Meg was bringing in money from all of her concerts, and if parents sent money, or there were other side gigs that people had, it all went into the common pot. We all took the same draw. And when there were five of us, and it was a very homogeneous group, it worked. The living collective expanded. When the working collective expanded, not everybody wanted to be in the living collective. And by the time the working collective expanded, we were now a multiracial group and multi-age group, which, I mean, there was a woman in the group who we thought was extremely old at the time. She was 50. And she wanted to think about retirement. And we're like all in our 20s and like, we don't have money to finance your retirement. So, actually, two of the new women who came into the collective had dependents. And so now we had to think about money differently. But we struggled with this, and we were willing to struggle with it, and we were willing to talk about it and try to work it out and try to work things in a way that felt right for everybody. And so some of the women got a bigger draw, and the musicians were also doing gigs that were not connected to Olivia. And what happened to that money? All of these things we talked about. And that's why I said from that passage that you quoted, that how we did things was important as what we did. We were willing, to the extent that we could talk about things and try to work things through, we did. There were a whole lot of things that we did not know how to talk about. You know, and race was one of them. But we had, and I understand that intention and impact are not the same thing. What I want to say is that we did the best we could at the time. It wasn't very good, but it was the best we could, and we kept trying, and nobody walked away saying, I can't do this. This is too hard. What became too hard was when our model of doing business in the world, which was just wasn't working, basically. We were not selling enough records to support the staff, which the collective, which at a certain point, at its highest point, had 14 women in it.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, and our records, and because we insisted on doing things through a feminist lens, which meant we were not going to let basically one-stops, which are like middlemen, and they were men who just decided who distributed records. We had our own distribution network of all women, and it just wasn't efficient in capitalist terms, and we couldn't sell enough records, and so that was, you know, that was heartbreaking in a way, that we just, and those were a lot of our struggles were around trying to balance and weigh out these conflicting values that we had, you know.
Right,
there's this
monetizing your business, as we would say now, and it's not a bad word. Then it would have been a bad word and a bad concept. And the hours of process.
Yeah.
I mean, that is something that a lot of the lesbian community is known for. Process all of this. Let's talk and talk and talk it through. And we get that in the book. We get that. We really begin to understand how hard that is. And at the same time, you have this audience of women primarily who just love your work and what you're doing. And at some point, and we're already, we only have about another 12 minutes left here, believe it or not. Things have to change. Things have to come to an end. I saw pictures, portraits of Ginny Berson that I didn't know. I know at one point you're talking in a meeting, and you write in the book, and I didn't have time to be kind. That's not the Ginny Berson I know. And different, younger woman than on a mission, I suppose. What changed for you?
Oh, gee, let's see. Boy, I could say a lot of things changed. I got older, for one thing, and that makes a difference. I developed a spiritual practice, actually. We were very materialistic in the Furies and in Olivia and in those early parts of the women's movement. We were actually, very anti-spiritual. We kind of put down women, anybody who had a spiritual practice, as like it's not the point. It keeps you from political work. I think what I've come to understand is that you can't really do effective political work if you don't have a center, and you don't necessarily have to have a spiritual practice. But to me, it's all about understanding that we are all connected, that we are all one, and that I don't want to live in a world where, honestly, this is a strange thing to say, but I don't want to live in a world where people are as angry and as thoughtless about other people as I was at that time. For all of our desire to change the world, I don't think we really thought about the impact that we had on individuals who got in our way. And most of those individuals, there was just a lot of horizontal hostility. Most of the people we fought with were people who were, a half an inch away from us. And most of the fights at those times were from people who were, a half an inch more radical than us, or a half an inch less radical than us. And that's where that horizontal hostility is so destructive and so endemic to parts of the left, at least the white left.
Well, I think also you're talking about being young as well. And when, and coming into self-definition, and when this is who I am, this is how I'm going to be, this is, everything else is outside that box. And part of that is youth. And as you mellow with age, the kind of work you're doing now, and if we can jump forward to talk for a moment about the kind of work you're doing right now in Oakland.
Oh yeah, so so we started this group actually after Trayvon Martin was killed, and Next Door had, which is this really horrible neighborhood listserv, which is all over the country, had started, and there was just, people were posting just horrid things on Nextdoor about, it was just racial profiling, basically. And Trayvon Martin had been killed, and my partner and I were like, this is not okay. We have to do something about this. So we started a group that has been active now for 8 years called Neighbors for Racial Justice. And we work in Oakland. We work mostly in our neighborhood, but we work throughout the city, and we do a lot of work around racial profiling and around white privilege. We have a 5-week class that has been taught to white women developed by 3 of our members. That's been taught now for about 3 years. They've taught about 10 or 12 different groups of women. We've worked in coalition with other grassroots organizations in Oakland. We work with the Department of Race and Equity in Oakland. We do work that supports what they're doing. We co-sponsored events with Joy DeGruy and Robin D'Angelo, and so and our approach is very different. What's different, one of the things is that we try much more to call people in rather than to call them out. And then my paid work is also, very similar. I work with an organization called World Trust Educational Services, and we do racial equity documentaries and educational work. And so I'm talking to people all the time now who are struggling with some of these same issues. And the focus now is to have a racial equity lens. To me, this is all the same, because feminism to me is, if it's not inclusive of everyone, it's not feminism to me. It's like, no, it's not. So, yeah, so all of that stuff, but I think, Peggy, a lot of what's changed and a lot of what has made Neighbors for Racial Justice, which is a multiracial group, white majority, multiracial group, what has enabled us to stay together for 8 years is everybody in the group has some kind of spiritual practice and so much less ego than we used to have, or we are so less run by our ego than we used to be. I don't want to say that we are free of ego. I'm certainly not, but it doesn't run us in the same way that it did when we were 20 and 30. And, I guess the other thing I would say, honestly, about what changed is that I've just had a lot of loss in my life, and that has changed me. And help me understand what's really important. And that, walking around furious at everybody is really not that helpful to me or anybody else.
Right. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Again, I just have to share with the audience that as Jenny and I at the beginning said, we've now known each other for about 40 years and done a lot of growth together, a lot of work together, all positive, wonderful, one of my favorite people in the world, honestly. And she ends up working with the daughter of a friend of mine from Santa Rosa. Jenny lives in Oakland. My friend's daughter lives in Oakland. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute.
That's right.
Once again, the circle stays together. Well, again, I want to remind you, talking with Ginny Berson, who wrote this wonderful book that's it's so worth reading. Olivia on the Record, a radical experiment in women's music, and the musicians of Olivia. I just, since we're not getting to the music, because I just wanted to talk about so much of this. And you can I would say go to the New York Times article for one thing, because it has a lot of the music that you can play, listen to. I mean, there were some wonderful, groundbreaking and fun things and musicians that came out of that time.
Excuse me, Peggy. I just remembered there is a website that's run by a person named J.D. Doyle.
Great.
It's called Women's Music Something, and if you Google that, you can hear a lot of the music.
Great. Well, I knew you would get us to that point. Obviously, I don't want to credit the New York Times with being the experts on Olivia for a lot of reason. But the history in here too, particularly of the Bay Area. Sorry, Nan, but it's part of who we all are up here in Northern California, and women of a certain age. Because that experience doesn't exist anymore. There are no more. I shouldn't say no more, but there's very few gay bars anymore.
Right.
The gay life in San Francisco, what it was before AIDS and after AIDS, and now completely different kind of thing. In some ways, that's good. A lot of things have changed for the better. Ginny, we just have a few minutes left here, about 5 minutes. I mean, there's so much we can talk about the book and your own history. What do you want to share about this?
Here's something I want to say, Peggy. I have been really lucky in my life to have great teachers. You were a great teacher to me when I came to KPFA, and not just in terms of how to cut tape, which you did teach me how to do that back in the day when we used razor blades to cut tape, but how to think about who we are serving and what we are, and the whole idea of service to an audience was really important to me. That's something that I also learned from really from watching the Black Panthers, and how, everybody focused on the men with guns, defending the community. But the Panthers also did tremendous service to the community, the free breakfast program and the education programs, all of that. So, Rita Mae Brown was a teacher for me. She really taught me, helped me learn how to write better. All along the way, I've had teachers, and I guess what I want to say, what I want to leave people with is that I hope that there's stuff in this book that can also be useful to people. I am really interested, have always been interested in making the world and changing the world and making it a better place to live for everybody. And if there's information and material and stories in the book, and honestly, it's not at all preachy, because I'm just not, but if that is of use to people, if anybody can learn from that and add on and keep it going, that makes me very happy. Because I would say that my approach has really changed, but my desire for a world free of patriarchy and capitalism and racism and imperialism, that has not changed. I still work for that.
And we are so happy you are, and we must continue. I will agree with that. Absolutely. Right now, it seems so far out of balance again. But I guess that's the way it's going to be. Ginny Berson, dear friend, and thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this. I'm sure all of your interviews are different, and I hope you'll post on your Facebook where all of the interviews are, so people can see them, and of course listen to the music, which is wonderful. But yes, I think there are a lot of information in this book, and I think there's some important herstory in there that many people younger than us have no idea what it meant growing up to be gay. In our era, and it's such a different world now. So there's and I'm so struck by what you just said. I've got to hurry here, but the men with guns, that's what people thought about the Panthers, but they were doing wonderful things in the community. The men that we see now with guns, they're not doing anything for anybody's community other than killing other people.
That's right.
They're killing people, but they're not out feeding people. They're not out trying to do all the most important things. Ginny, we gotta go. I don't want to leave you.
Thank you so much.
You too. I don't want to go. It's so wonderful being reunited with you, and I miss all the work that we used to do together. But there's still time. I have to go to Native America Calling. I'm late. Take care. Love you. And this will repeat at 1:00, and we'll post it on SoundCloud. And then I think we've got the YouTube thing going on too. All right. Say hi to everybody. Okay. Bye-bye. All right. That